Welcome, Abbie, to the Body Pod. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Yes, we're so excited. So I want to start with your kind of mission statement on your website because I loved it. And it says, in my journey through exercise physiology, metabolism, sports nutrition, and body composition, I've dedicated my career to improving health through science. It's not just a passion, it's a mission. So can you kind of just say like how you got to where you are and how you found that this was kind of your mission, your passion to be helping women specifically with this physiology, with the metabolism and with the body composition, because this is what everyone wants at this age. Obviously, our podcast is for women over 40, but I only train women over 40. And so it's all of these are hot topics.
Yeah, I'll try and be brief. But I fell into this kind of line of work when I was younger as an athlete. And I found that there were not a lot of answers. I had a lot of injuries, and it really led me to the love of science, of how we could ask a question and answer it. And then, to be honest, I didn't even know what a PhD was. I come from a low-income single-family home, and I found science and really started to realize, okay, you can ask a question, you can answer it, and oftentimes the answer is not what you thought it would be, and then you adapt and you move from there. And really, in this space of exercise and nutrition, I see a lot of misinformation and a lot of quoting of science. And what is our goal in life? And it feels like I am in a position to be able to answer real world questions and then translate them in a way that matters. And that, to me, is what embodies the mission of how do we take actual evidence and create it in a way that can lead to an outcome that people can use in their day-to-day life, particularly for women when there's so much misinformation.
Oh, so much. So do you feel like some of this, like where do you feel like there is a blend or a need for like real life experience, real world experience with science, kind of fusing that together?
Yes and no. I mean, I and every scientist you ask will do it different, but I have always created and had the opportunity to create a research question that has a direct outcome.
Mhm.
I mean, in our world, like, I'm supposed to bring in money and publish papers, and oftentimes doing research that way makes it harder to bring in money and publish papers. And so I think I like to inform even conversations like this and talking to women in real life, and obviously not just my own personal experiences, to inform my next study. And
Mm.
so it's not necessarily, I think sometimes we rely too much on personal experience, only personal experience, when in reality, like, everyone's experience is so vastly different. So how do we capture that and be more inclusive to then get results that can impact more people?
Okay,
I can't.
that's
I
genius
know.
what you just said right there. So if we take that and we say, okay, let's just go right for the science because there is, like you said, there's a ton of misinformation. And even with science, we have these reports that come out, and then all of a sudden next week, another report comes out. And it's confusing for someone like me that's a trainer, but it's really confusing to the general public because they're like, wait, you were just saying this, and now you're saying this, and I'm confused. So we know that women are underrepresented in science and sport and in all of the research. So you have published more than 165 papers, research. So over that, how many have been female specific?
Well, I've published almost 190.
Wow.
But
Good. That's
I say
amazing.
that no, I say that because it's like, who the hell cares? No one's going to read them. And more importantly, like, there is this world of what you publish in a paper isn't really always telling the same story. Meaning,
Mhm.
it's really hard, and you have to look at some of these individual responses, which is why even conversations like this matter. It goes back to your question of experience translation. It's bringing both of these worlds together. And I would say in the majority of those papers, it is a blend of men and women.
Mhm.
But even like I've always included women in studies when I can, but we've learned so much more about how to better characterize them.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where the shift is going. It doesn't mean we only study women and that I would argue we shouldn't just have a study in men, but how do we then describe them well enough so we can understand if there are differences in how we evaluate it? And so I would say within the last probably 5 years, we've done in my lab, I have done a much better job of just studying women, doing a better job of characterizing even hormonal contraception, age of menarche, pregnancy, some of those things that we know are impacting all of the physiological outcomes. It's just hard to do
Mhm.
that in every one study.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're just what I want to focus on today is the peri slash postmenopausal female. Menopause is having a moment, a big moment, and it's great. But with a big moment comes conflicting viewpoints. And so I would love to break down what your version of like what the science says from you of being able to break it down for the common female that's like, I don't know who to believe, I don't know what to do. But if we're starting with the a post that you had that said one size does
I
not fit
loved
all.
that post.
100%. So if we're looking at peri and postmenopausal women, and I get this all the time, well, I'm lifting weights and I have high protein and I eat clean, I'm gaining weight, and a lot of times it's like, well, but I know I'm gaining muscle. I'm like, you don't gain muscle that
Yeah.
fast.
Hmm.
So if you're gaining multiple pounds a month, that's not all muscle.
Hmm.
So what can you talk to us about that?
And this may be an unpopular opinion, and maybe why I don't have a louder voice on social media is because it is so hard to be
Mhm.
absolute. And I
Mhm.
see this in all of our work that we're doing, of like really most of our work in the last couple years is dedicated to perimenopause.
Mhm.
I'm not even there yet. So I'm 40, but I will tell you, like, things start changing before you're in perimenopause. And when we look at each individual woman in a study that then we average, and those are the
Mhm.
results that are reported, there is no one good answer of like the popular opinion of what's happening in perimenopause. It's going to be different for each one of us. And so I guess my take is let's use the science and what we know and validate these women and what they're feeling, and that there is no cookie cutter response, and how do we allow them to ask better questions and fight for what they need, because I feel like that's where it doesn't come full circle. You go to provider, here's how I'm feeling. Well, like, whoa, that's not perimenopause, or that's just you need anti-anxiety meds. And so it's really saying, what does each woman experience, and what is the science saying? And I can tell you some of that,
Mhm.
that's rooted in science, but I think, I want to make a statement of, if there's a woman out there that doesn't experience it that way, that doesn't mean that's not perimenopause or that's not a challenge. It's probably just because it hasn't been reported. Just whereas if someone is gaining weight or struggling with certain things, it doesn't mean exercise and nutrition is the only way, or that hormone replacement therapy is the only way, and that it always has to be that way. It's my roundabout way of saying is there is no one size that fits all, and we need women to have a better understanding of their bodies. And the more data we can have about ourselves, the better advocates we are of, like, here is what I was 3 years
Mhm.
ago, here's what I'm feeling now. It's not just life, and it's not just because I'm taking care of kids. It's because there's a physiological change, and how do I document that for myself so that then I can advocate to get the help that I need.
That is so
Yeah.
true.
I mean, and I love that because this is what I personally deal with the groups that I run is I try to say, listen, use your body as a science experiment.
Mhm.
The data matters. It 100% matters, but it's not going to look the same. I could take the
Mhm.
same two women with the same two muscle mass around the same weight and give them the same macros, and they're not going to respond the same.
Nope.
100%.
But I think that's the important message that women need to hear is everyone wants to give, like, just tell me exactly what to eat and exactly what to do. And I'm like, it
Mm-mm.
doesn't work that way.
Mhm. It doesn't. And I think, though, what you're saying and what I totally value is we need to give a better set of tools for these women and education of like, here are the things that we should start with. If
Mhm.
they don't work, here are some other things to think about. If those don't work and you're feeling, maybe we get some external help, or these are the other questions to ask. And I feel like that's where our system kind of falls apart for women. Is there's no place to go, no one with all of the
Mm-mm.
answers, and no black and white.
Yeah.
And there's more gray for women than there are for men because of the changes in hormones and brain, body, gut connection. Like, how do you pinpoint it? You can't.
What are some of
Mhm.
the things in that toolbox that you tell women to like the questions to ask or the things to do on a daily basis or once a year?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know about in this order, but I am a big believer in body composition
Mhm,
measurement. And it's one of those things that, women are afraid of, but it's measuring where we're at that given time, even down to our
mhm,
bones, our fat mass, our muscle mass, our bone, and where we store our body fat is very telling,
Mhm.
and related to metabolism. Definitely like a regular blood draw. So just basic, immune function, cell function, and then can we get some additional hormones, estrogen, testosterone, even some of our inflammatory markers. Not to see what's wrong, and sometimes you have to fight for those things, but here's where they
mhm,
are, and here's where they start to change. I mean, those would be the most high level
mhm,
things that are more accessible. And then I always like to tell women to kind of keep track of not what they're eating, but habits. Like, are there certain things, like if we have a good concept of, okay, this phase of life, I'm feeling really good. What are some environmental factors that are going on? So that when I'm going through a phase where I'm not feeling so good, what are the environmental factors that have changed? And if they haven't changed, because I feel like women, oh, it's because you're really busy. You have a lot on your plate. You're trying to do too much. You're not sleeping. I'm like, well, I did all of those, the exact same thing 5 years ago. Well, why am I feeling the same? So then
Mhm.
you can start to say, oh, I had my hormones from 5 years ago. What do they look like? Or maybe it's a nutrient deficiency. I think it's just that collated data for yourself can be very
That's a
helpful.
really good tip. I need to start doing that. I take mental notes, but I do think actually journaling it, even if it's just short, would be really helpful. One quick question on blood draw, because I really think that's a powerful tool. What test do you, besides just a basic blood draw, do you think the Dutch test is a great test, or is there one that you find as being someone that's very into science that you find that's helpful or most accurate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm also an advocate that women shouldn't have to pay for concierge medicine. Like, can we leverage what we'll do in our healthcare? So any blood is good
Mhm.
blood. And now we have so many tests you can do at home. So I don't have a favorite, to
Okay.
be honest. This isn't what you asked, but I think something that I am finding more insightful is at home daily urine measurements. And so there's a couple big companies that have been designed for fertility, but now you can do daily measures of estrogen, LH, sometimes FSH. And it is way better than a single time point blood draw, because now you get, is it rising? Is there a pattern? And it's fairly inexpensive. Like, we have used Uva and Anito, and those are like things, the technology is incredible. And my hope is that becomes more of standard of care, of like, let's capture some of this daily urine. It's not the same as blood, but it gives you that. You can't do your blood draw every single day. It really
Mhm.
gives us that. So that's one thing that I might recommend, maybe in addition or before blood draws, more accessible
Yeah,
as
and I
well.
guess Dutch is urine, not a blood draw. I probably asked that question wrong, but yeah. No, you're right.
Okay, so if we go back to body fat, because this is when we get these tests, and I assume when you were saying like testing for the bone, for the muscle, all of that, we look at DEXA, which is the gold standard. I know we have MRI too, but I feel like that's very few and far in between that women would get. But a DEXA for bone, And then we have in the US, we have DEXA that doesn't really necessarily tell about the bone. That's more just like companies that are giving body composition. So they're showing lean mass, they're showing body fat percentage, and women always care about the body fat percentage. But what I try to tell them is I care about the lean mass. And if the lean mass is going up and not so much the body fat percentage, because that is what everyone wants to know and kind of where they hone in on. So outside of like we have the InBody, we have the DEXA, we have underwater weighing, all of these tools here. What do you look for with like a healthy female that you would say is pretty on track to have a longevity window with what their body's saying right now?
Yeah, and so I'm a body comp nerd, spend a lot of time looking at body composition, and it's really because of this misinformation. And so, I mean, I think just to clarify, first point is any body composition point helps. You just have to know its limitations. So I would add one more, like even if a woman has a scale at their home that you stand on, that without your socks, not going to be the most accurate, but if you do it repeatedly, they're pretty good at tracking changes. I think the value of something like a DEXA to get bone, total body bone, is really helpful. And then honestly, I don't think the fat mass is really helpful at all. What is helpful and what we look at, especially over time, is we know that women that have more visceral fat, which you can't tell by looking at a woman, and increases with perimenopause, is related to significant increased risk of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, etc. So distribution helps. To identify distribution, sometimes those methods will help. And then the percent body fat, honestly, will allow me to create more of ideal weight standards. So, like, for instance, I use it in a manner of like sometimes women will be like, oh, I want to weigh what I weighed in college. Well, based on your body right now, you would have to lose muscle, or that's actually not a good weight based on how much body fat you have. Here's more reasonable. And I
Yeah.
think we have a lot of women that feel like a low percent body. We don't have a good concept of what is a normal percent fat. We have these unrealistic expectations. So I like to use it as in a tool of like, okay, here's maybe what your goal weight would be, with the emphasis and more health with muscle. We know muscle is the most important part. But then how do we align that with what our composition is?
Okay, so then everyone is going to say, "Well, how much muscle mass do I need to have?" And obviously, that genetics comes into play,
Mhm.
age, height, weight, activity level, all of those things. But is there a number that you're like, okay, maybe 100 pounds of muscle around, or is there no real box?
Yeah, so we use a term called fat-free mass index that we have now. Here's where I can use this conversation to inform research. We've created some female athlete normative data for fat-free mass index, but maybe we need to create some normative fat-free mass index data for middle-aged women to answer that question. It does matter, activity status, etc. But the interesting thing about fat-free mass index, it also includes how heavy your bones are and how dense they are, which we see have a significant change. The
Hmm.
other thing that I would want to know in that question is I always like to align muscle mass and metabolic rate. And so it's more of a question of, based on your muscle mass and your lifestyle, is your metabolic rate quite different? Is it not what we think? That tells me a bigger story about, okay, something is in disconnect. Is it low muscle quality? Because it's not just about mass, it's the type of muscle. And then how does that align with what our resting energy expenditure is? Not that muscle burns a whole lot more fat, but it does give us some insight that there's some metabolic dysregulation going on.
Okay, two important parts because I'm going to forget them. Number one, can we define what low muscle quality is? Because most women aren't going to know that there's a difference in like muscle is muscle. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, you'd have to come to the lab and measure. but we do it all of the time. And it's a really important, the best way I describe it, you'll never look at meat the same, but like a low muscle quality would be like a ribeye where you have fatty infiltration. It's the same size of piece of meat, but it's much more marbled. And our muscles turn like that when we age, but it does seem to happen also with that transition in perimenopause. Whereas a high quality muscle looks more like a fillet. We have a high quality muscle, there's less fatty infiltration, less connective tissue. We know that lifestyle can impact that, but that ribeye type of muscle is related more to metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, and more importantly, as we age, like more into postmenopause, things like slips, trips, and falls,
Mm.
things that are going to result in more complications.
Okay, so then a higher quality muscle would set you up better for
Everything.
all of those, everything,
Yeah.
longevity, independence, quality of life, healthy, good quality muscle. So if we move back to, we know in menopause, we lose the fat distribution from around the hips and the thighs, and it tends to go more towards the abdomen region. So if we look at visceral fat, when women come in and they're like, well, I never had this pooch, they're thinking it's visceral fat, but the visceral fat, you can't tell.
Mm-mm. And that's where I think that this combination of lifestyle matters. And you know this working with women, but we need to give us more grace. Like, yes, you might have a little bit of a pooch that you don't want, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're in a worse health outcome. So then it's a question of, like, what are we doing are you making all of the right health changes? That's one question before we start looking at fat loss in your abdomen. It's not the
Mhm.
same. And when we think about muscle quality and health and those things, like setting ourselves up with our resistance training, that's going to improve muscle quality, our high intensity interval training, our consistency, those things help support better muscle. And you're still likely going to have some of that distribution to the abdomen, but absolutely that does not mean it's visceral fat. Usually visceral fat is coming from high alcohol intake. So if you're drinking a lot of wine every day, and a lot of, some of it's genetic, and thinking about a lot of our processed foods, there's some data there. And so it's not just a matter of age. Lifestyle absolutely plays a role, which I think is underappreciated when in this space when we're talking about like
Definitely.
hormone therapies and stuff. Like I think there's probably a role for that, and we need to emphasize that for women that are really struggling, but that doesn't discount the lifestyle pieces that
Mm.
go hand in
I'm
hand with
glad you
that.
brought this up because I don't feel like a lot of people talk about the quality of your muscle mass. I don't hear it a lot, and it is important.
What's one of the key pieces? Right now there's such a contentious debate about lifting heavy versus walking versus aerobic exercise. Any exercise is good exercise. But what we see often with muscle quality is you need a
Mm.
stimulus, something that's like heavier, like resistance training and or interval training. But what I see is with more aerobic exercise, and I'll tell you, like I run a few days a week. Like I was a distance runner. I love that for my mental
Mhm.
health. But if I do that fasted or under fueled, that's going to exacerbate my muscle quality. It's not going to help me. So instead of not doing that work, it's just about being more conscious about the fuel. And let's be honest, some women don't want to worry about that. They don't want to eat to exercise. And so then it's being more strategic with what's the stimulus we're giving our body and our muscle to maximize the quality and maintain it as we age.
Okay, so I want to know from the horse's mouth what because this is again, I'm just coming up with I have a very large peri postmenopausal
Mhm.
group. And again, what I try to break down is like there's not one single right formula.
Mhm.
Big there's big rocks, but you guys are already doing that. It's higher protein, it's resistance training and cardio depending on the different types. Like it's goal specific and it comes
Mhm.
into like the puzzle. But people like they'll want to know, okay, so how many days do I need to resistance train and how many days do I need to do hit? And I'm not getting my body composition because maybe I'm not doing enough, sit or I'm doing too much list. And I'm like, That's not it.
Mhm.
That's not it. Like there's no one perfect program. You have to be consistent. You have to see what level and ability level, how you can recover all of those things. Do you have, now that I just,
Give your
said
spill.
no, do you have like a number or like a range of like what women should be doing, even if it's just your opinion?
I mean, I would say consistency is first and foremost. What can you actually do regularly? And that's honestly, so I'm a bit biased toward like high intensity resistance training and high intensity interval training, not because it's better, but just because we can fit it in here and there. And it tends to result in lower injury rates because it's lower volume. So that is not and you should only be able to do that a couple times a week. Um, Big proponent of resistance training, but we shouldn't be lifting heavy every single day, like especially what we
Thank
see
you.
is with perimenopause, we don't recover the same. And so I guess consistency, you do want a higher stimulus than you're used to a couple times a week. And that is going to be so dependent. So maybe if someone is just starting out, then they're going to need to, do a little bit of jogging or a little bit of heavier weights. But for someone that's doing it all the time, think about doing a stimulus that you're not used to, so a little bit heavier a couple times a week. It's all about periodization. And then I think the other piece that this age group needs to pay attention to, and I would love your insight on this, is I feel like every female is making it so much harder than it needs to be. They
Amen.
really want to meet their goals. So we're like underfueled. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too, of like, you have all these goals, we're type A, we want it done, we want it like now. But then we're actually we're making it harder on ourselves, meaning like you got to find that balance of you're actually eating to match your fuel, but you got to do it in a way that's consistent and you also feel okay. So for instance, we know that sleep is one of those things that starts to fall apart in perimenopause. But did you know too, if you're not getting enough calories, and sleep is going to go down too. So like if you're overtrained or you're trying to push yourself too much, that's a conversation as well. So it goes back to what works for your body. Are you consistent? Tracking some of those things. Like what days do you feel good, that you can sleep well, that how do you describe it? Like, how some days you just feel like accomplished and your body feels
Yes.
good. And other days you feel like shit. I don't know if I
You
can say
can.
that, but
You
it's like,
can.
it's usually the days that we haven't prioritized our fuel, we've overexercised, we haven't slept, we're taking care of everyone else. So it's trying to minimize those days as much as we can and optimize the days that we are like fueling in a magic world, right? Like who could do that every day?
Yeah. So but then the conversation comes back to women. Yes. I mean, the majority of their lives, they have been underfueled and overexercised. But for someone that is like, but I have 40 pounds to lose and
Yes.
losing some of that fat, I have to be in a calorie deficit, but it has to be appropriate. And you have to have all these other markers on, because bringing that weight down for someone that does have that weight is going to make them healthier. But that's the pendulum of like, how long do you stay here and how long do you stay here?
Well, that's those people I would recommend having some more consistent help. So you have that feedback of transition. So someone like yourself. And I always say this too. Usually if your goal is weight loss, you're eating more than you're used to because it's more of you're prioritizing your food of what you're eating. And that becomes like the main focus. Not everyone, and so even with weight loss, you still need to make sure your macronutrients, more importantly, are high quality. We're eating consistently throughout the day and around our training. And yes, there will be a caloric deficit, but it's often less than what we need. Like what I see all of the time is these women that are trying to lose weight and they're so underfueled that there's metabolic adaptation. Like, I have some specific examples in my mind that I'll give you. Like we've seen some women with a metabolic rate of like a resting metabolic rate of like 550 calories and they're 180 pounds, right?
What?
Yeah. Yeah. I thought several times, like, is our machine broken?
I thought.
And it's more than one person. And then we look, okay, is it a hormonal component? Maybe a little bit, but it's not all hormone driven. And then I ask them, tell me about your day. And they're like, oh, I don't eat anything until noon. And then I have like a little salad, or I have this. And then I'll say, okay, why don't you try this for me? I know your goal is weight loss. Let's pause that for a moment. Um, when you wake up, have a high quality protein for breakfast. Let's add some vegetables in there. Like, just prioritize your fuel earlier in the day. And I can't tell you how many women come back and say like, oh, I actually feel so much better. And then there are some small changes in our metabolic rate. Now that takes longer, but it is this mindset of caloric restriction by itself is often not the best approach for weight loss. And sometimes we need to pause and say, I get you need to lose 40 pounds. I'm on board with that. Let's pause that for a second. Let's kind of look at where your metabolism is now and your habits. And then we go back to weight loss.
Yeah. So, okay. So we have the RMR. If they can get that from any of the numerous ways that we talked about with some of this, some of the testing, and we can get a RMR. So, do you notice, because this is just something, and I don't, this isn't science backed. This is Haley's experience, but most of the women that have been underfed and in that low energy availability state for sometimes
Yep.
decades, they're the ones that come back in and they're shocked because they're like, I exercise, I'm doing resistance training, but I have osteopenia.
Hmm.
Does that come from just constantly pulling and being in that deficit of low energy availability over, 20 something years?
I mean, it definitely can contribute. It also is a genetic
Mm.
component that can be a piece. And I would wonder how much they've loaded their skeleton over the years. But absolutely, if you're underfueling chronically, but I would say one, we can still maintain bone. And what I've seen is a lot of that comes from what happened during adolescence, like peak bone
Mm.
mass period. It's not necessarily what they did in their 20s.
Wow.
Mm. Okay, so I love what you said too. I don't remember where I was listening to this, but the more muscle you have, the better your bones are because the muscle is pulling on that bone. And so, yes, like the jumping and all of this that we're hearing is great for the bones, but that heavy lifting and that pulling of the muscle, the more muscle we have is going to help us, if instead of like cut out all the noise and just aim at getting a lot more muscle, and everything else kind of starts to fall into place better as far as body fat percentage and quality of muscle tissue and, stronger bones and all of that.
Yeah, 100%. And I would just maybe qualify a little bit. We don't need to be focused on gaining a large amount of muscle. It's about maintaining the muscle that we have and improving the quality. That often does lend itself to increased muscle mass. It depends on, like, if you're talking about your population who's already very active,
Hmm.
who's been
Mhm.
lifting weights, they're not going to gain a ton of muscle. But it's
Yeah.
how do we maintain it? And then what we see with the muscle quality is you see improvement in metabolic health. And
Yeah.
so it is multifactorial, absolutely. But I don't want women, like, I think sometimes women are like, well, I don't want to gain mass. I know you don't want to, but you should be focused and put in an environment where we are trying to build muscle because it's not that easy. Like, we want to be in an
No.
anabolic.
It's
I
so
wish it were
much
that
to.
easy, right?
Yeah.
So kind of be in that anabolic state, but realizing, and some of our work has shown like that female middle-aged muscle is probably where some anabolic resistance starts, meaning our muscles don't use the proteins the same, which just means we really need to continue to prioritize that nutritional component.
Okay, so the nutrition component of the that I'm gonna put a pin in that because I don't want to forget it.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right, and I didn't probably specify that clear enough. But that middle-aged female, especially the postmenopausal, when estrogen and testosterone and everything like walks out the door, um, that is really hard for my women to put just to maintain their muscle,
Hmm.
let alone even build. And we're looking at like a half of a
Hmm.
pound every cup. Like it's not more than, I mean, it's very few and far in between. And they have to work really, really hard to get that. But if we look at the nutrients then, and we know the protein doesn't work the same when we're in this postmenopausal stage. But is there a specific protein amount that you would recommend for someone, or do you have specific macros? Because this is the question that was asked multiple times for me to ask you. Do you have any guidelines there? Loose
This was one of
guidelines.
my questions also.
Okay, well, nothing like stirring the pot. I love it. Um, so, I mean, I had someone ask me, like a reporter or something, where does the 1 gram per pound of body weight come from?
Mhm.
And there is some of that, but so the research in women is a minimum of 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. I think that's still sometimes hard to chew on, and again, it depends on what your life phase is. I'm gonna speak to, like, more of women, I would say, in my space, where I try to exercise every day, I wanna maintain optimal body composition, but I have a full-time job, and I run a family, and it's
Mhm.
crazy. I am not gonna count out my protein, but what I'm going to do, like, every day to make sure what's my total daily, it's really prioritizing a minimum of 30 grams per meal or snack, and not going for more than a couple hours without feeding. And if you do, that's where I feel like the supplement piece comes in, where an essential amino acid or a protein shake, that's not what our daily diet should consist of, but using it as a supplement for when we can't get that. And
Mhm.
so I feel like where most women go wrong is, if I were to count out protein every day and focus on protein every day, one, I can overeat, right? Depending, and we've seen that
Yep.
depending on where I'm getting my protein sources. But let's bring it back of, like, okay, I'm going to have a meal, I'm going to have 30 grams. And then a couple hours later, maybe I'm not hungry, but I don't know when I'm going to eat again. I'm going to have 30 grams. Or, okay, like this morning I was on the go. I didn't get breakfast. I brought a protein shake so I could get it. Maintain that amino acid profile. Think less,
Mhm.
implement more, and then that consistency.
Yeah. Oh, spot on. So the nutrient timing is very important. What is that window around a workout?
I
What does
love
the
this
research
question.
say?
Yeah, and I think this is where I've spent, I don't know, the science has led me to explore this more, particularly in women, for two reasons. One, women tend to fast before they
Mhm.
exercise, partly because of the GI distress. Like, we get more gut distress before we go to exercise. But it seems like, and this is built on many pieces of data, that having protein in our bellies before exercise is more impactful than after exercise, and of course more impactful than no exercise or no food at all. Um, and it does seem to be the case and more important for perimenopause. And so, like, what I would say is shift the narrative. For the longest time, we've really been talking about this window of opportunity post exercise. But all of that data was done in men.
Mm.
And now what we're seeing is, like, we probably would have a greater impact. Well, we have this data, a greater impact on lean mass, greater improvement in training volume, greater fat oxidation, greater energy expenditure, if we have some protein prior to exercise. And so, what does that look like? I mean, I would say if you've had a meal within a couple hours, great. But if you haven't, something within 30 to 60 minutes that's more easily digestible.
So it's not the
Okay,
30
so
minutes
then
after that whole I would hear
This is
that
where I would,
all the
yes,
time, like, make sure you consume X amount of protein, carbs after your workout. So that's not
I wouldn't throw that out the window. What I would say is that becomes less important if you're fueled before. And for a woman, I would tell her to eat before, prioritize that versus after. And you probably, unless you just did a very long, intense workout, you probably don't need both.
Mhm.
Then after, have a meal within an hour. And that's where I think we've put so much emphasis on the back end of workouts that we're going under fueled into workouts. And so, yes, if you're a person that can eat, or you're busy and you can get your workout in, then absolutely you should and you haven't eaten or fueled, then you absolutely should prioritize some carbs and or protein, depending on how much endurance exercise you did or how much muscle glycogen you depleted within the first 30
Okay.
minutes. Um, yeah, but I would say prioritize on the front end. And then if you do that, you're really looking at your next meal after
Yeah, that
exercise.
makes sense. What about fasted cardio? People that wake up and wanna do that fasted cardio, because I feel like that's a big trend right now.
Here's my unpopular opinion on that. Like, if you wanna do that and you have no performance or body composition goals and you're doing it for your mental health, great. Like, if it's just moderate cardio and that's you're doing it because you enjoy it, fasting is not gonna be that big of a deal. You really won't see a lot of training benefit, but you're getting that heart benefit. You absolutely need to have something then when you finish. If you're doing it with the goal of burning more fat and calories, you are digging yourself a hole. And you are going to burn more muscle, and you're actually going to burn less fat, and we're probably going to be more fatigued. Now, I'll be totally honest. Like, sometimes I run at 5 a.m., and the last thing I'm going to do is eat. I do try to have some amino acids, but I'm not training for anything. I'm doing it for my mental
Mhm.
health. So I'm like running, or for my cardiovascular health. So I might do once in a while like a fasted run, 4 to 5 miles, but then I come home and I eat. And I probably had a snack before I went to bed. And so I'm just fine. It's very different. But to say like it's going to help me, it is not what we should be doing.
You heard it here.
Mic mic drop. So, does it matter if you have, like, 15 grams of protein before and then 15, like, you don't have the full 30 because we want the full 30. Can you break it up, or does the physiology not work that way?
Yeah, you can break it up for sure. It's about it really comes down, the whole goal is to fill up our amino acid pool, to have amino acids readily available and within the bloodstream, especially during cardiovascular exercise. We do oxidize the branch chain amino acids, which you'll find in like a protein. So I would say some is better than none.
Mhm.
But what I wouldn't do is I could feel that might be a strategy of like, oh, I'm going to take 15 here, and then I'm going to take 15 here, and then I'm not going to have a meal for a few hours.
Mhm.
I would say just put the 20 grams at the beginning, and then
Mhm.
it buys you a little bit of time after you exercise. Actually sit down and have a whole meal. I think when I was younger, I underappreciated the impact of whole body metabolism on eating real food.
Mhm.
Like, oh, a protein bar, or like I'm on the go. Like, I'm a big proponent of dietary supplements because they help us meet our needs. But the majority of, especially women, like, we need the benefits of digesting and absorbing whole foods, our whole proteins, our fruits and our vegetables and our grains. You don't get that from a protein
No.
supplement.
Yeah. Okay, so then let's move on to the cardio portion. This is where it gets really fun.
This is so good.
So we have different types of cardio that work different systems in the body. So we have the low intensity steady state zone 2, and then we have the high intensity umbrella. So in your opinion, or what the science says, do we need both of those for good quality cardiovascular health?
Gosh, that's a loaded question. Do we need both? Probably not. It comes down to load on the body and time efficiency. I think what for most people it would be beneficial to do a little bit of both, because you can't do high intensity every single day, and nor should you. And there's actually data to say that can result in negative consequences if you do hit every day. Whereas on the opposite side, if we do low to moderate all of the time every day, we become adapted and you don't see any benefits. So there's a maintenance component. And like I mentioned, we do see this rise in orthopedic concerns and injury from the wear and tear,
Mm.
which is where the blend of both comes in. And it goes back to that consistency. If I have more tools in my toolbox, and I'm more likely on the day I only have 20 minutes to exercise, I don't need 2 hours. I need 20 minutes. I need 15 minutes, and I can put something in there.
Yeah. Okay, so I love your very wise approach that is obviously backed in science, but then also kind of what you see as these the extremes of only do this or don't do this, really blending in, because it depends on if a female's super stressed, I'm not gonna have her just go do HIIT every day because she's exhausted, and that's where some of that lower, steady state comes into play, and if it gets her out the door.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
I'm a big cyclist, I'm not giving that up, and so those rides are important. There's a time and a place for that 100%. Is there a study recently that you have changed your mind on? Like, if you've had an opinion or the science says this and then something has changed and you're like, well, I didn't see that coming, or it's a different idea maybe?
I don't know. I would say like my mind has changed a little bit with every study I read. So I'm very
Okay. Yeah.
open-minded. Um, but no, not really. I think you said it best when we started. It feels like this space of perimenopause, the voices have gotten so loud and so black and white. And it's made me step back to say, like, what are the messages that are being said and how are we communicating them? Because nothing is black and white. So I don't know. I think the science in there's a term called exercise snacking. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's where um, like little spurts of exercise throughout the day is appearing to have a bigger health impact than was originally thought, opposed to like our general recommendations of 150 minutes per week, kind of these big goals.
Mhm.
It's changed enough where I'm like, huh, that's an interesting thought. But think about it. If I'm doing exercise snacks, I don't know about you, but if I think about exercise, I start sweating. Like, and I might as well just go the 10 minutes. Like, well, screw the snack. Like, just give me like. So I'm thinking about like what population is that most feasible for. So I would say that that piece is kind of interesting. But I think what you said again is really important. Where you say if you have a woman that is not feeling well and underslept, um, there's a lot of hormones like cortisol
Mhm.
that are elevated, and sometimes we can exacerbate that. And so it's really, there is no one size fits all, because maybe that day she just needs to go for a walk. Is the walk going to give her a ton of benefits on her body composition or metabolism? No, but it's going to get her blood flowing.
Mhm.
And then she's going to sleep better and she's going to feel better. And so I think we have to realize that some of those days, maybe you just need to take a nap, or maybe you don't need to worry about the high intensity and the heavy lifting. You just need to go walk,
Yeah.
and you'll have more energy and recover better. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I
But
think it's
Yeah.
good. I think if we really go back, and this is where it's like super boring and it's not flashy, and so it gets missed
mhm,
because everyone wants the latest and greatest. But when we come back, it's like this is all back to the
Mhm.
basic. Eat whole foods
mhm,
from the earth, try to have a variety, have more protein because we know that we don't process it the same way. Do any kind of strength training. Sure, we need to have different rep ranges in there for different reasons.
mhm.
Have a variety of the cardio, whatever you're going to do. Sure, it's probably best to maybe mix in a little of this and a little of that, but there is not a single, exact copy, like cookie cutter program that this is what you have to do or you're not getting results. Because I hear this all the time. I'll give some advice and they'll be like, but is that for perimenopause? I'm like, um, it's for
Yeah.
anybody.
Mhm.
Do certain things change? Sure, our ability to recover, all of those things. But from what I've been hearing you say, is that it's a really well balanced, boring approach that probably hasn't changed, but what we need to come back to with all of these other things and these noises in the space.
Yeah, and I think when someone asks you, is it for perimenopause? Everyone is going to feel perimenopause different.
Mhm.
So it's leaving that space to say, like, no, I'm really tired today. Like, I can't do the hit. If I recover today, then my hit tomorrow is going to be so much better. Whereas that's not the message that we were ever taught. Exercise more and eat less is that day to day in,
Yep.
day out. And in perimenopause, we need to have a better understanding that you are going to have more ups and downs, whether that's sleep, whether that's hormones, whether that's recovery. And it's going to be different for all three of us. And so I think
Mhm.
it's taking that boring message, but being very much more attuned with your body and how it's responding. and being able to give yourself grace and adapt accordingly.
For sure. And going back to what you said of taking note to how you feel, and so you can take stock in that. I feel like that's something I've experienced recently where I have felt more exhausted, more tired. And yeah, you can make the excuse. I have a 1 year old. New mom, you're working, you're managing a household, all of the things. But once I got blood work and urine testing, and I'm in adrenal failure, or well, my adrenals are shot basically. And so I really wasn't listening to myself, and because it's go, go, go. Like I can't miss a workout. I can't rest. And my doctor specifically said, hit workouts are not going to be your friend right now. Like you need to rest and move, obviously, and do the things. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like listen to your body. If you need to rest, rest. So then you do have energy. And I have been doing that. I've been better and I have had way more energy the next day. But I think as women, we beat ourselves up if we don't go and do that workout. We don't get, check all the things off of our list. So I think that's such a strong, important message. And I like hearing it from someone who has all the science of you do need to listen to yourself and give yourself grace.
Well, yeah, and I'll just say one thing in your personal case of like, HIIT's not going to make it worse. HIIT's going to make it worse if you're underslept and
Yeah.
underfueled. Because we can't forget the mental health
Oh, yeah.
piece, right? That I feel like sometimes that keeps us afloat. So I would say just make sure you're fueled and then do HIIT
Exactly.
maybe once or a couple
Yeah.
times. But yeah,
Yeah,
for
because the
sure.
mental health piece is huge for me in that too. Running is like my mental health too.
For sure.
So, if we move it back to the metabolic syndrome, because a lot of women don't know exactly what that is and what we do if they indeed have that.
Yeah. So, I mean, metabolic syndrome really simply is our inability to regulate glucose and insulin, our response to insulin. So, kind of maintain blood glucose on our own. And that can be a result of many things. And it just so happens that estrogen does have a protective effect against metabolic syndrome, but also cardiovascular disease. So even if you're healthy, and you have been and you've been active, as our hormones downregulate or are so variable in perimenopause, just automatically we're at greater risk for some of these conditions. That doesn't mean we will get them, but that just goes back to having some of those normal blood work of what was normal for you and how has it changed. Because sometimes, think about our healthcare in the United States, I think is pretty terrible. Like you go in, if you're healthy, they don't know what to do with you. They get a single time snap of what's going on. When for perimenopause, it could be different 2 days later. And so it just allows you like having some of those so you can be your own advocate for that. And a lot of times one of the initial side effects of some of that metabolic or that glucose dysregulation is weight gain, is fatigue. And of course, like that can be related to a lot of things. So it's not necessarily cause and effect, but we just have this increased risk as we transition into postmenopause.
Mm. What do you feel about electrolytes? Do you think that they're needed on a day to day basis for someone exercising an hour a day, a different outside of like an endurance sport or longer than 90 minutes?
I mean, I would say it depends on how much salt you're eating. Like I preferably would rather eat my salt than drink it. Um, in some cases, yes. If someone is underhydrated and not really getting enough nutrients, and I feel like some women are so concerned about eating clean, like all of our unprocessed foods. But in reality, if you have some processed foods and you're exercising, you probably don't need that extra sodium. My other thing would be if someone is feeling really fatigued, first and foremost, check your hydration levels. And it's good to check your electrolytes, like really how much sodium, and it's not just sodium, there's other electrolytes, magnesium, chloride. And so it is a good approach if someone is regularly dehydrated. I think and a heavy sweater, but not something we all need. There's some, other ways to get it in, especially through our food.
Mhm. So can people come and like work with you specifically or that's not an option?
I know,
I
but
mean, no, only if they want to come get a master's or a PhD. Still brainstorming on how to do that because yes. So unfortunately, no.
the answer is
No,
no.
But they
not
can.
at this moment, we'll say.
Yeah.
Not at this
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, not at this moment.
As a
Perfect.
researcher and someone in the science field, are you working on anything that you are so excited about right now that you haven't talked about? Or I know we're coming to the end, but I think it's so interesting what you do day in and day out. And I just wondered what you're working on right now that you're excited about.
Well, thanks for asking. Science takes
Hmm.
forever, so I think that's the hard part. Yes, we have a couple projects that have looked at performance and metabolism across the menstrual cycle. So, kind of premenopause to really understand, do we need to change, modify our recovery strategy, some of those things. And then I'm so most excited about our perimenopause group. And we have a really cool study right now looking at fasting versus protein prior to some exercise on fat metabolism, on muscle, on energy expenditure. Along with some other like lifestyle factors to then my hope is that we set up more of a training study to really understand like one question I have is so everyone says lift heavy, but what is the biggest stimulus we need to actually see changes in muscle size and quality, particularly in this space? We don't know. Like we could be seeing lift heavy, which also increases testosterone, have lots of benefit, but how do we translate that? What is that leverage point? So and then we have some really cool female athlete work. I think that the more we understand even about what younger women do, it really impacts this phase because I think you're speaking to someone like myself. I was a collegiate athlete, I was always active. Now you go to the doctor for a primary care and no one knows what to do with you. You're healthy, you have all these things, you've exercised your whole life, but I'm not the same. Like I need,
Yeah.
like what is changing? And so it's really understanding what's happening as we age.
Yeah, and I think that this is still such a new
Hmm.
topic. Where women we're getting more research on women, but there's still a lot that do you think that we don't know?
100%. And something that hasn't even come up that I want to plant the seed of. I'm a whole foods person. We identified that, but there are some really kick ass ingredients that can help us feel better. Like put your tools together. But then, Laura, you spoke to this, but what are some of the things that can help with our brain fog, with our sleep, with our, like, what are some key ingredients and dietary supplements that I might not be able to get in my diet? And so we do look at some of those key ingredients or what are some dietary supplements that help with feasibility, and we just don't know how they've impacted female phys over the last the longest time, or what happens when we start to pair some of the ingredients we know that works, but we know our brains are different and our guts and our absorption is different. So I feel like that's still untapped potential. And I know like Stacy has mentioned a couple ingredients, and I know you guys have talked about creatine, and it's still understanding how does that help certain symptoms and I'm all about health and quality of life of how can we optimize that and very kind of feasible and effective strategies.
I'm so
Abby,
grateful for you that you are
we
doing
need
your.
we need a part
I
2
know.
here because I feel like we still I could have an entire day with you. You're like,
So,
I don't want to
yeah.
have an entire day with you,
No,
Haley.
bring
She's
it.
like,
This
Yeah.
was
I don't
an
know if I have
hour's
that much
good.
information, but
this was
Mhm.
fascinating, and I we're so grateful for your time and for your devotion to giving and unlocking this information for a lot of the females, well, for
Yeah.
all of the females out there, and our physiology and kind of tapping into these underserved areas of study that over the next decade I feel like my daughter is going to really
Yeah.
benefit from, from us stepping into the spotlight and people like you that are actually in the labs. So thank you so much for everything that you do and for joining us today. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we just
Yeah.
thoroughly loved
Just
having you
so
on
grateful.
today.
Thanks for having the conversation and for translating. I feel like you guys get all the information out. So appreciate you.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star review and sharing the Body Pod with your friends.
Until next time.